Sometime in the middle of the 60s, Johnny Boy Soprano comes home to Newark with an offer. A friend of his has something going out in Reno, and there's a chance to take the whole family west and start over, and he puts it to his wife the way anybody puts anything to his wife.
They are not going anywhere! I'd rather smother them with a pillow than take them to Nevada!
Always with the drama!
30-odd years later, her son walks in past the front desk, takes a pillow off a gurney in the corridor, and starts down the hall toward her room. He'd just found out what she'd done.
Ma, I know what you did.
Sir, please.
He isn't going to get there. There's a commotion in the hallway, and things go a different way, and we'll come to it. She said the thing in 1967, and he did the thing in 1999, and the show never once puts them next to each other or points, which is correct, because that's not how it works in a house. You don't inherit a method. You inherit a set of options, and one of the options in that house, quietly for 40 years, was smothering. This is a video about Livia Soprano, who is the best thing in this show and possibly the worst person in it, and who does all of it, the restaurant, the boy in the bathtub, the hit on her own son, without ever once asking anybody for anything.
What? What did I say now? I suppose I should have just kept my mouth shut, like a mute, and then everybody would have been happy.
Livia was the hardest part on the show to cast. Chase has said hundreds of actresses came in for it, and almost all of them did the same thing, which was play her big, the monster, the harridan, the mother from hell, and it died on its feet every time, because a woman who announces she's difficult is a woman you can see coming, and the whole point of this character is that you can't. Nancy Marchand came in and read it flat, and Chase laughed out loud. He's described the reactions since as recognizing his own mother in the room, and says that when he showed his family, they all landed on the same relative. Suzanne Shepard was the other one seriously in it. She auditioned 5 times and ended up playing Carmela's mother instead, which is a small mercy for everybody. Marchand had been working professionally since 1946 and on Broadway since 1951. 2 Obs, a Tony nomination, 4 Emmys for playing a newspaper publisher on Lou Grant, and, if you want the range in one line, the mayor of Los Angeles in The Naked Gun. 50 years of stage technique, and what she does with it here is almost nothing. She sits. She looks somewhere past whoever's talking. She lets a sentence out flat and lets it land wherever it lands. There are a lot of enormous performances on this show, men filling rooms, and hers is the only one where somebody's doing less than everyone else and taking the scene anyway. And a fair amount of what you remember is hers rather than the script's. The grunts, the little groans, the snarl, the eating with her mouth open, she made all of that up. The most quoted thing about the performance is the part nobody wrote down. The mother in a gangster picture stirs a pot and cries, and that's the whole job. Chase has said as much himself, and said he wanted his interesting instead. Which sounds like a small ambition until you notice that no one had done it. That from the 30s to the 90s, across an entire American genre about violent men and the families that made them, the mother is decor. Salon's critic got there in 1999, right after the first season finished, and called her part Medea and part Lady Macbeth, and said the show was about a boy and his mother the way Psycho was about a boy and his mother, except this one wasn't a corpse in a chair. She was alive and getting stronger. One last thing, and it's a coincidence I've decided not to make more of than it is. Chase named her after a real aunt, one of his mother's 10 brothers and sisters, and he'll tell you that whenever anyone asks. He also gave her the maiden name Pollio, and I, Claudius, a book he's called a favorite, has a Pollio in it, and Livia, who is the most famous poisoner in the history of the genre. The way Livia finds out that Tony is seeing a psychiatrist is that AJ tells her. He isn't informing on his father, he's a kid making conversation at his grandmother's house, and it comes out the way things come out of children, which is completely and at the worst possible moment. Her response is the one she's had loaded for about 50 years, that the whole business is a racket, and that she gave her life to her children on a silver platter, and this is how he repays her. And then she does the only thing she ever does, which is repeat it to somebody else. The next time we hear about it, it's on tape. The FBI has Green Grove wired.
A psychiatrist. He's been seeing one for a while now. God only knows what he says. Better cake he had died than go on living like that. That's what his own mother always used to say.
And then, at the end of it, almost as an afterthought, that she doesn't want there to be any repercussions. That's the whole character in one sentence, and I don't think the show ever improves on it. She has just told a mob boss that his nephew is talking to a stranger about the family business, which in that world is the one unforgivable thing, and she's closed by saying she hopes nothing comes of it, not as a lie. She means it, or at least she means it in the only sense she'll ever have to answer for. She didn't ask for anything. She reported a fact and expressed a preference that the fact have no consequences, and if it does have consequences, that's between the fact and everybody else. The remarkable part is that when the FBI plays this back to Tony, it's admitted as evidence that his mother wanted him dead, and if you actually read the transcript, it isn't. There's nothing in it you could take to a jury. There's a woman worrying out loud about her son. The Vesuvio business is the same move run in the other direction, and it's the one I'd point to if somebody told me I was being unfair to her. Tony finds out from Silvio that Junior is planning to have somebody killed at Artie Bucco's restaurant, which will end Artie, not because of the murder exactly, but because of what a murder does to a place people go for dinner. So he goes to his mother and asks her to talk to Junior, which is a reasonable thing to ask, since she is the one person on Earth Junior listens to, and she won't. She tells him that if his uncle has business with Arthur, he probably knows what he's doing, which is a sentence with a kind of horrible dignity to it, a deference to the man's judgment that she has never once extended to anybody in her life. So Tony burns the restaurant down himself, which is the only solution available to him and is also completely insane, and Artie's insurance pays out, and Artie starts again and spends the next several years quietly not being the man he was going to be. And then, sometime later, Livia tells Artie that Tony did it. There's nothing in it for her. She has no stake in Artie Bucco, no grievance against him, nothing to gain from the disclosure, and no visible pleasure in it either. It just goes off, the way information goes off when it's handed to the one person it can hurt, and it nearly gets Tony killed. Artie turns up with a hunting rifle, and he's close enough and angry enough that it could go either way, and what saves Tony is that he denies it, swears to it, on his mother, and tells Artie the poor woman is old and confused and doesn't know what she's saying anymore. Which works. Artie believes him, or decides to, and smashes the rifle on the ground and drives off. So Livia hands Artie the truth. Tony gets out of it by swearing an oath on Livia. She's the weapon, and she's the alibi in the same afternoon, and she wasn't present for either. She was somewhere else, having said a true thing to a friend of the family. The Green Grove material is where you can watch the technique at close range, because there's no violence attached to it, and the mechanism sits out in the open. There's a stretch in the first season where she notices that 3 of Junior's captains have suddenly moved their mothers into the facility, and she raises it with him. This must be some kind of end run. What do they think? She's stupid. And Junior, who is already in a bad frame of mind about being managed by his nephew, tells her to stop upsetting him. And she turns around inside about 8 seconds. What did she say now? She supposes she should have kept her mouth shut like a mute, which is the entire operation compressed into one exchange. She puts something in his head that will keep him awake, and then she's the injured party for having spoken, and neither of them will ever refer to the first half of that again. Then there's Christopher and Brendan, and this is the one that changed how I think about her. Junior comes to her about the 2 of them. They've been hijacking trucks under his protection and hiding behind Tony, and he's humiliated and doesn't know what to do about it. And Livia goes to bat for Christopher. Tony's always loved him like a son, she says, and so does she. He put up her storm windows for her 1 year. Junior asks her what he should do. Maybe Christopher could use a little talking to, she says. And on Brendan, she has nothing at all. Junior brings him up and she doesn't know him. Christopher gets a mock execution on the docks with 2 Russians and a gun that doesn't go off. And he's so frightened he soils himself, and he lives. Brendan Fee Lone is shot through the eye in his bathtub by Mikey Palmis while Junior waits to hear about it. Now, I've heard this scene described as Livia ordering a hit, and it isn't, and pretending otherwise makes her smaller than she is. A little talking to is what saved Christopher's life. It's the mildest thing anybody says in that conversation. What she does about Brendan is nothing. She has no opinion, she doesn't know him, and there is no version of what she said that a reasonable person could read as a death sentence. But that's the trade, and I think it's the most frightening thing in the character. She intervened for one boy over a set of storm windows and declined to for the other because he'd never done her a favor, and the difference between those 2 positions is a bathtub. And the thing that makes it work, the thing that lets her go home that night and sleep, is that she's right. She protected a young man she was fond of, which is a kind thing to have done, and she was under no obligation to protect the other one, and if you asked her about it, she would tell you the truth, and the truth would be that she did nothing. Melfi, who has never met her and is working entirely off what Tony brings into the room, gets there in the first season. What she says is that Livia has, at the very least, what they'd call borderline personality disorder, and she goes through it. The instability, the joylessness, the incapacity for love or compassion, and then she names the specific thing, which is that people like this are very good at splitting behavior, at creating bitterness and conflict between the other people in their circle, which is the clinical description of everything I've just spent 10 minutes describing, arrived at from the outside, by a woman with no access to any of it. There's an argument, and it's a decent one, that the profile fits narcissism better. Tony later mentions Melfi floating that about Janice, and I don't think the video needs to settle it. What matters is the accuracy, and the fact that Tony's response to hearing it is to put his psychiatrist against a wall. Early in the first season, Livia is driving her friend Fanny home and puts the car into drive instead of reverse and hits her. Fanny's hip is broken. Livia sprains a wrist. There'd already been a fire at the house, something left on the stove, and between the two of them, the family runs out of ways to keep pretending. And Greengrove stops being a thing Tony keeps raising and becomes a thing that's happening. She calls it a nursing home. Tony calls it a retirement community, which is what the brochure calls it, and he isn't wrong. It's a pleasant place, there's a wine list, people play cards, but he's lost the argument before he opens his mouth, because the accommodation was never the objection. The confrontation itself is about a minute long, and it's one of the best scenes in the first season. He raises it, and she tells him to kill her instead.
And stab me, here, now, please. It would hurt me less than what you just said.
What makes that land isn't the theater of it, because she's theatrical constantly, and most of it slides off. It's the ham. She's not making a gesture at the universe, she's directing him to a specific room in her house and a specific drawer in it, and the effect is that a suggestion which ought to be ridiculous arrives sounding like a plan. He came to talk about assisted living, and now he's standing in his mother's kitchen being told where the knife is. The compressed version of all this is 2 words, and she uses them for 30 years.
Oh, poor you.
It means what it sounds like it means, but it's doing something more particular than sarcasm. It's a ruling. Whatever you've brought her, whatever's happened to you, it has been weighed against what she's carrying and found insufficient. And there's no appeal, because she has never once told you what she's carrying. You just know the scales are in the room. Most of the daily work happens over food, and I've talked about this before in another context, but what it's actually for is worth following. Tony finishes a plate of ham at her house, and turns down a second one, and she gets from that to him never letting her feed him, which is a sentence that takes a man with a full stomach and makes him the person who deprived her. In hospital, she calls the tapioca disgusting, and then hands it straight to Janice, so that the disgusting thing is also a gift, and Janice is now the daughter who takes what her mother won't eat. Artie brings her a duck ragu he's obviously proud of, and makes the mistake of telling her it's northern, and she hands the word straight back to him. Oh, northern, and that's the end of the ragu. Carmela's macaroons are too sweet. Carmela's ricotta pie is a cholesterol problem right up until she's told it's the low-fat version, at which point it's revolting on a different ground entirely, and Carmela has now failed twice with one pie. She promises AJ. Bakes ziti for his birthday and doesn't bring it, and the kid asks what happened to the ziti, which is the right question, because the ziti was never the point. None of that is about food. Every one of them is a small manufacture of the same fact, which is that she gives and nobody appreciates it, and the reason it works is that you cannot argue with a refusal. If she'd asked for something, you could say no. She never asks for anything. She declines, and the decline leaves you holding a plate. Junior has a line about her that gets there faster than I have. A woman with a ham under her arm, crying because she's got no bread. The pilot complicates all of this. Tony brings her a CD player. She doesn't want it, she says so, and he sets it up and plays it anyway, Connie Francis. Who's sorry now? And she sits there and enjoys it, visibly, while continuing to perform, not wanting it. It's a lovely little scene, and it's usually read as her orneriness losing to something in her, which it might be, but a few minutes earlier she doesn't recognize his voice at the door. And there's a reading, and I don't think it's a stretch, that some of what this video is calling technique is a woman in her 70s whose mind is going, and that the family's habit of treating every symptom as a maneuver is its own kind of cruelty. I don't think that's what's happening. I think the record scene is a woman who wants the record and needs the refusal more. But the show leaves the door open, and it leaves it open again at the stroke, and a video that shuts it is being more certain than the material.
Face! You got a fucking smile on a face!
Chase has a phrase for the whole apparatus, and it's better than anything I've come up with. The tyranny of the weak, which gets at the part that's genuinely hard to hold, because the weakness isn't a costume. She is old, she is alone, she has outlived her husband and her usefulness, and most of what she wanted, and every complaint she makes is broadly true. That's why there's no way to fight it. You can't take the position away from her. It's hers. The reason we get any of Tony's childhood at all is that AJ gets suspended for stealing sacramental wine, which is such a specifically Catholic small-time offense that it barely qualifies as delinquency, and the school wants him tested. And somewhere in the conversation about whether there's something wrong with the boy, Tony starts remembering being the boy. The episode's called Down Neck, after the part of Newark the family came out of, and it's the only sustained look the show gives you at Livia before she was old. She isn't different. You go into a flashback episode expecting the moment it all went wrong, and there isn't one. She's about 40, played by Layla Robbins, and she's already doing everything she'll still be doing in a nursing home 50 years later at the same volume with the same face. Young Tony says something ordinary about something he wants, and she comes at him with the threat to stick a fork in his eye, and it's delivered in passing, in a kitchen, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, which is what makes it stick. She isn't in a rage, it's just available to her, and that one, for what it's worth, is real. Chase's mother came at him with a knife over a childhood complaint about not having an electric organ and told him she'd like to stab his eye out. He said so on the record more than once. A lot of Livia is like that. The silver platter, the poor you, the toothpick line, and every so often it's worth remembering that the writer's room didn't invent this woman so much as take dictation. Then there's Nevada. Johnny Boy has an associate, Rocco Alla Torre, who has an opportunity out west, and for about 5 minutes there's a version of this family that leaves, and Livia ends it in a sentence. They are not going anywhere, she says. She'd rather smother them with a pillow than take them to Nevada. And Johnny Boy, and this is the part that tells you how long this has been going on, doesn't argue the substance. He says, always with the drama. That's it. That's the whole marriage in 2 lines. She threatens to kill their children, and he tells her she's being theatrical, and neither of them treats it as remarkable, because in that house it isn't. Nobody goes to Nevada. The other thing in those flashbacks, and it matters for reasons that only land later, is the amusement park, where young Tony hides in the trunk of his father's car and watches Johnny Boy and Junior get picked up by the police. There's no good day in this episode. People sometimes remember Johnny Boy as the warm one, the fun parent, the relief, and the show doesn't give you that. What it gives you is a boy watching his father get arrested from inside a car boot, and it gives you the finger, though not here. That's 2 seasons later in Fortunate Son, and I'm saying the episode out loud because I think people compress the two, and it matters that they're separate. Tony's 11. He watches his father take a butcher's pinky off with Junior holding the man down. The family goes home. The meat from that shop is on the table. His mother is happier than he's maybe ever seen her, and he faints. That's the first panic attack, and Melfi eventually walks him all the way back to it. Tony can date his father's violence. He can name it, place it, describe the room. It happened on an afternoon, and it had a beginning and an end, and a man lost a finger. Whatever his father did to him is available to him as an event. Nothing his mother did is. There's no afternoon to go back to, because it never once took a shape that would fit inside one, and 40 years later he's paying a psychiatrist to help him find it, and what he finds is the butcher. The case for the defense, and I do think there's one. Livia was the daughter of Italian immigrants out of Avellino. Her father came over with, by her own account, 17 cents in his pockets, and the family lost a child on the crossing. She married Johnny Boy Soprano, and that marriage was not a romance. It was an exit, the available way out of being poor in a country that had no other doors for her. She had no money of her own, no standing, no work, no vote in anything that mattered, and she was married to a man who cut fingers off people for a living and brought the mood home, and she won that marriage, comprehensively. Tony describes it to Melfi years later, still angry about it, still not hearing himself. His father was the toughest guy he knew, and his mother wore him down to a nub, a squeaking little gerbil by the time he died. Melfi's response is dry, and it's the correct one. Quite a formidable maternal presence. Which is the polite way of saying that the woman he keeps describing as a helpless old lady beat a violent professional criminal over about 40 years using nothing but her voice, and that her son is sitting there telling the story as a complaint about her rather than as an account of what she was up against. Chase has said since that he came to believe, without proof, and he's careful about that his own mother was likely abused by her father, and he's drawn the line himself between that and Livia and her father Augie. I don't want to run that further than he did. It isn't in the show, and there's a way of using material like that which turns a portrait into an excuse, and Livia doesn't need excusing so much as she needs accounting for. But here's the thing I keep landing on, and it's the reason this movement exists. She was right about Nevada. Men in this show who chase a fresh start somewhere warm get themselves and other people killed, and everything we ever learn about Johnny Boy suggests Reno would have been a catastrophe with better weather. She read her husband accurately. She made the correct call for her family, and she made it by threatening to smother her children in their beds. Both of those are true. You don't get to keep one. The attempt on Tony's life comes at a newsstand. Two men, in daylight, in public, and it goes wrong the way these things go wrong on this show rather than in films. Messily, at close range, with a lot of noise and a car ending up somewhere it shouldn't. He survives it, which everybody involved understands is a problem, because a failed attempt on a boss is not a thing that gets quietly filed away, and the question of who ordered it has an obvious answer. Junior's been humiliated for a season, he's been made a front boss without being told that's what he is, and there's a war on that Tony has been managing and losing. Tony works it out fast, and it doesn't cost him much to work out, because the man is his uncle and the logic is clean and this is the business he's in. Uncles do this. What he cannot get to, and won't, is the other half. Melfi does. She's had a season of him bringing his mother into that office in pieces. The Green Grove business, the guilt, the phone calls, the way he describes a woman who has apparently never in her life said a warm sentence to him. And she puts it together with what's just happened to him. And she says it. Not gently, but not cruelly either. Just the thing she's come to think is true, and he comes out of that chair at her. He puts the glass table in the middle of her office through the floor, and then he gets hold of her and holds her down in her own seat and tells her what he'll do to her. And then he walks out and tells her he's finished with therapy. That's the first time the show does this, and it does it again in the third season with Gloria, and by then you're supposed to notice that the two women Tony Soprano puts his hands on are the two who got closest to saying something accurate to him. He doesn't hit people who lie to him. He's surrounded by people who lie to him, and he manages it professionally, with patience, for 6 seasons. It's the true thing that goes off in him like a struck match. So he leaves. He doesn't accept it. He gets in the car with his mother's version of events intact, and he'd have kept it intact, I think, indefinitely, because the alternative isn't a fact you absorb, it's a floor giving way, and the only reason he doesn't is that the federal government has been recording his mother for months. They play it to him. That's how he finds out. A man in a suit, in a room, presses a button, and what's actually on it isn't what you'd expect, and it isn't what a prosecution would want. There's Junior saying what a boss says, that it has to happen even though it's blood, and there's Livia talking about her cousin Keiki, who had a lobotomy, and who afterwards, as she tells it, looked exactly like her son, empty, a shell of a man, and that it would have been better if he'd died than gone on living like that. Except she doesn't even say that last part as her own opinion. She attributes it. That was what Keiki's mother thought, apparently. Livia is passing along a bereaved woman's view about a different man in a different decade, in a room with the one person who is trying to decide whether to have her son killed, having just mentioned that her son currently reminds her of him. There is no instruction on that tape. If you handed it to a lawyer, they'd tell you there's nothing there. A grieving old woman reminiscing about a cousin, an underboss talking business, and no point at which the two are joined by anything you could point at. And Tony sits in that room and hears his mother arrange his death, and he's right, and there's nothing he could ever show anybody. I said earlier that the machinery of federal surveillance on this show almost never produces anything. This is the exception, and look what it produces. Not a conviction, not an arrest, not a case. It tells a man what his mother is. 20 years of wiretaps, warrants, vans on the corner, agents sitting in cars eating badly, and the one thing it definitively establishes is a fact about somebody's family that he already knew and couldn't afford to know. In the middle of all this, and I mean literally in the middle, the same handful of episodes, Tony wakes up and there's a woman living next door. Her name is Isabella. She's an Italian exchange student, oral surgery, of all things, house sitting for the Kuzu Manos next door, and she's beautiful in a warm way rather than a sharp one, and she's kind to him in a way nobody has been in about a season. He takes her out to lunch. She tells him about Avellino, where his grandfather came from, and how beautiful it is there. And then he drifts, and he's in an old house in that village, and she's in a rocking chair nursing an infant, and the infant's name is Antonio. She doesn't exist. Nobody's house sitting. There's no dental student. Tony is on lithium and Prozac at the time, which Melfi put him on because he can't get out of bed, and the lithium is doing what lithium occasionally does at the wrong dose. And when he tells her about the woman next door, she takes him off it immediately and then does something more useful, which is tell him what he built. Because he did build it. That's her reading, and I don't think there's a better one available. His subconscious, at the precise moment it could no longer avoid what his mother had done, sat down and manufactured a mother from scratch. Not a lover, though the show lets you wonder for a while. A woman who feeds him, listens to him without an angle, comes from the same part of Italy his people came from, and holds an infant with his name on it. The show is never this unsubtle again. It doesn't have to be. Every mother in the rest of the series is a variation on a theme that gets stated flat out, in the first season, in a hallucination, that somewhere in Tony Soprano there's a picture of what he was supposed to get, and it's not complicated, and it's not much. Somebody who was pleased to see him. The bleak joke inside it, and it's the reason this belongs in a video about Livia rather than a video about Tony, is where his imagination goes shopping. It doesn't invent a thing. Avellino is his own family's town, the place his grandfather came out of, and the rest of it, the village house, the rocking chair, the nursing, the old country warmth, is the entire iconography of the Italian mother in every gangster picture ever made, which is the exact tradition Chase has said he built Livia to demolish. Tony's unconscious is given complete freedom and no constraints whatsoever, and it reaches for Mama Corleone. He can't picture a mother who isn't from a film because he's never met one. So he goes to kill her. This is the end of the first season, and it's the least ambiguous thing Tony Soprano ever does. He drives to Green Grove, walks in, takes a pillow off a gurney in the corridor, and goes down the hall toward his mother's room. There's no scene where he talks himself into it, and no scene where he weighs it. He heard the tape, and now he's holding a pillow, and the show gives you both facts and nothing in between them. He doesn't get there. There's commotion in the hallway, staff moving, and she's coming the other way on a gurney because at some point in the last hour, Livia Soprano has had a stroke. He drops the pillow, and he leans down over her while they're wheeling her past and tells her he knows what she did, and then something happens in her face, and he loses it completely, shouting, "Look at her! She's smiling! Look at her!" while security gets hold of him and takes him out of the building. Nobody has ever settled what that is. I've watched it more times than is reasonable, and I've never got anywhere with it, and I've come round to thinking the show declines to tell you on purpose. There are 3 readings. None of them wins. The first is the simple one. She had a stroke. Strokes affect the muscles of the face. What Tony sees as a smile is a woman whose face has stopped obeying her, and he reads triumph into it because he's just been told his mother wanted him dead, and he is not at that moment a reliable instrument. On this reading, the cruelest thing in the scene is that she isn't doing anything at all. The second is the one a lot of viewers hold, which is that she's faking, or at least performing an injury larger than the one she has, and that the timing is the giveaway, that the stroke arrives at the precise moment she needs to become unaccountable. People point at a scene the following season where she's watching Tony fall down her porch steps, and there's a laugh there, briefly, before she puts the face back on. And that's real, that's on screen, and it's hard to unsee. The third is the one I find most interesting, and I think it's underrated: conversion disorder, where genuine, disabling physical symptoms are produced by psychological stress rather than by damage or by fraud. It's an old diagnosis with an unfashionable history, and it's exactly the sort of thing this show likes, because it demolishes the question. Not real, not fake. Real and produced by her, and not on purpose, and not by accident either. The reason I'd give that one the most room is that it's the only reading under which the question can't be answered even in principle, and that's the character. For 13 episodes, the show has given you a woman whose interior is completely unavailable, who has never once said a sentence you could hold her to, whose complaints are all technically true, whose worst act is a story about a cousin. And now here she is at the single moment of her total defeat, having been found out, being wheeled past the son she tried to have killed, and her face is illegible. You cannot prove what it means. You will not stop being certain. Which puts you exactly where Tony is, which is the whole trick, and it's why the scene works on people who tell you they don't much care for ambiguity. Junior, incidentally, runs the identical arc in the opposite direction, years of performed incapacity that curdles into the real thing, until the man who used dementia as a legal strategy is genuinely gone. That's his video, and I'll leave it there. The second season is where the show has to solve a problem it made for itself, which is that everybody now knows. Tony knows, Junior knows, the audience knows, and the woman at the center of it has had a stroke and cannot be confronted about any of it. Because the moment anybody tries, she can't remember. That's the register for most of a year. She can't remember. Sometimes she can't remember the tape, sometimes she can't remember the conversation you had yesterday, and there's no scene where the show tells you whether that's true. Tony brings it up and it slides off. Janice brings it up and it slides off. And the family's response is the one families have, which is to keep testing it, which never works, because there's no test. Janice comes home for it. That's the other thing the season does. She arrives to take care of her mother, which is the stated reason, and there's a house involved, which is the other one, and the two of them settle into a domestic arrangement that is essentially two people running the same operation against each other in a small space. It's the funniest material in the character, and it's funny for a specific reason, which is that Janice is bad at it. She's got the technique and none of the patience, so you can see the working. When Janice does it, you know exactly what she's doing about 4 seconds before she does it. When Livia does it, you find out a season and a half later from somebody else in a parking lot. And then there's the business with the plane tickets, which I think is the single most instructive thing in the entire second season about how this woman works, because she doesn't do anything at all. Tony wants her out of the way for a while, so he gives her 2 first-class tickets to Tucson, tickets that came to him out of the Scotino bust-out, which is to say they're stolen, and he does this because it's convenient and because on some level it's contemptuous, a way of handing his mother a nuisance and calling it a holiday. She takes them to Newark Airport. They get flagged at the counter. She's detained, she panics, she calls Carmela, and inside a day the FBI is in the Soprano house with a warrant, and Tony is arrested on the night before Meadows' graduation. She didn't plan any of it. There's no version of the story where she did. She couldn't have known what the tickets were, and she certainly couldn't have engineered the counter, and the whole thing runs on a piece of federal record-keeping she has no access to. And it is still, unmistakably, the single most damaging thing she ever does to her son, and she does it by standing in an airport holding what he gave her. I don't want to make that mystical. It's a coincidence, and the show is building a plot. But it does rhyme with everything else about her, because what it looks like from inside the family is one more occasion where enormous harm arrives through Livia, and there is no point at which she did anything you could name. The other thing that happens that season comes earlier, well before any of the airport business, and it's the conversation with AJ. He's 13, he's just been in a minor car accident, he's been reading Camus and Nietzsche at school in the way 15-year-olds read them, which is badly and all at once, and he has worked out that he's going to die. He's frightened in a way that is completely genuine and that nobody in his house knows what to do with, and he ends up at his grandmother's, and he asks her, more or less, what the point is. And she tells him, "Why does everything have to have a purpose?" she says. "The world is a jungle, and if he wants her advice, don't expect happiness. He won't get it, people let you down. And then, in the end, you die in your own arms." AJ, and this is the part that gets me, tries to translate it into something a person could survive hearing. "You mean alone?" And she says, "No, it's all a big nothing. What makes you think you're so special?" I've gone back and forth on this scene for a long time, and I've landed somewhere I didn't expect, which is that it's the only honest moment she has in 6 seasons. She isn't manipulating him. There's nothing in it for her. There's no third party it's being staged for, and there's no version where saying this gets her anything. A frightened child asked his grandmother a real question, and she gave him the true answer as she understands it gently, without a single one of her instruments deployed. That's her, unarmed. That's what's actually in there. And it's the worst thing anybody says to a child in the entire run of this show. She dies off screen. Second episode of the third season, a stroke, in her sleep, and the show doesn't dramatize it. Somebody finds her, and then somebody phones. Tony's reaction is nothing much. That's not me being cute. It's what's on screen. He gets the news and he doesn't collapse and he doesn't shout. He just sort of takes it in and puts it down, and the way he's playing it is a man waiting to find out what he feels. The panic attack he has in that episode isn't about her at all. It's about Meadows' boyfriend, which is its own thing and not this one. The feeling arrives later in Melfi's office, and when it does, it's not grief. He tells her he's glad, that he wished for it, that he'd wanted his mother dead and now she is, and what he felt when he heard was relief flooding into him. And then he goes further than he's ever gone about her out loud, that she was a selfish, miserable bitch, in blunter language than that, and that she ruined his father's life. He never says anything that clear about her while she's alive. He can't. That's most of what the first 2 seasons are. Then there's the wake, and the wake is the best thing in the episode, and I'd argue it's the best scene the character ever gets, which is remarkable given that she isn't in it. Janice organizes the thing, because Janice would, and she decides that what the room needs is for everybody to go round and share a memory of Livia, something they'll remember her by. And you can see it land on the assembled faces, because it is a genuinely terrible idea, and every single person there knows it immediately. Fanny goes first. She's in a wheelchair. She's been in one since the hip. Since the afternoon, Livia put the car in the wrong gear, and she says that Livia was her best friend, and that she was the one who always called her with the bad news. Christopher's next, and he's high, and he can't do it. He starts somewhere and gets lost and ends up somewhere philosophical and general, and he sits back down having said nothing about her at all.
What I'm saying is,
Which is at least an honest failure. And then Carmela ends it. She calls the whole exercise a crock of it, which it is, and says the plain thing, that Livia was a terribly dysfunctional woman who spread no cheer at all, and that the reason she didn't want a funeral in the first place is that she knew there was a problem. Hugh, Carmela's father, goes further and rants about the family living under the yoke of that woman for however many years. Livia spent about 70 years making certain that nobody could ever hold anything against her. Every sentence deniable, every act somebody else's, every cruelty phrased as a fact or a worry or a thing a cousin's mother once said, and it mostly worked. Not perfectly. There are people in that room who could name something specific if you push them, and one of them is sitting in a wheelchair. But the harm that actually shaped these people arrived sideways, at an angle, through somebody else's hands, and there's no afternoon any of them could stand up and describe. What there isn't, on the other side of the ledger, is anything at all. Nobody's got a warm one. Not one uncomplicated memory in a room full of people who spent their entire lives in her weather, and the best they can manage between them is a woman with a broken hip who liked getting her phone calls. Outside, meanwhile, Artie has had a few, and it comes up again, because this isn't the first round. Artie went at Tony with a rifle 2 years ago over exactly this and got talked out of it, and he spent the time since knowing what he knows and choosing every day to accept the version where Livia was a confused old woman. And now the confused old woman is dead, and he's drunk at her wake, and he's standing outside with the man who burned his restaurant down, and he wants to take it into that room and say it in front of everybody. He doesn't. He backs off again, the way he backed off the first time, and goes back inside, and the two of them go on being friends, more or less, for the rest of the series. That's her last act of consequence in the series, a thing she said in a kitchen going off in a car park after her funeral for the second time, and failing for the second time because the man she handed it to has never once been able to pick it up. The episode has one more thing in it. Twice, Tony ends up in front of an old film. Meadow and her boyfriend are watching it earlier, and at the end, he's alone with it. It's The Public Enemy, Cagney, 1931, the film that more or less invents the American gangster picture, and the bit he's watching at the end is the last few minutes where Tom Power's mother is upstairs getting his room ready, happy, singing, because her boy is coming home. She doesn't know he's already dead, and Tony sits there and cries, which he does approximately never. I don't think you have to work hard for that one. The show that replaced the gangster picture spends the night of its mother's funeral, watching the gangster picture's mother, who is everything Livia was built not to be. And the only thing that can make Tony Soprano cry is a fictional woman being pleased about her son. And then there's the rest of it, which isn't in the show at all. Nancy Marchand died in June of 2000, between the second and third seasons, of lung cancer she had been living with for about 5 years. She'd had it before she was ever cast, and her agent told HBO, and they made the show anyway. Her husband of nearly 50 years had died 7 months before her. She was the first of that cast to go. At the second season premiere party, she'd turned up frail and on oxygen and sat apart from everybody. And a reporter asked whether she was strong enough to keep going, and she said, "You bet your ass I am." Chase hadn't originally planned to bring her back for the second season. She'd asked him, at the end of the first, to just keep her working, so he wrote her back in. The scene in that third season episode, the one where Tony and Livia argue, the last time you ever see her, is a fake. Rhinoceros built it out of unused footage and existing dialogue, compositing her face onto a body double across something like 8,000 frames, a couple of weeks of work, and $250,000. Chase got the idea from Gladiator, which had done something similar that same year to finish Oliver Reed's scenes after he died mid-production. It doesn't quite work, you can see it, and she wasn't alive to be asked whether she wanted it done. What they argue about in that last assembled scene is memory books. Carmela bought them 20 years earlier so Livia could write things down for her grandchildren, and she never filled them in. And the last thing, which I find genuinely hard to shake, Chase has said what he'd had planned. The airline tickets were supposed to escalate. Livia was going to be leaned on by the government and end up testifying against her son, which would have handed her, from a wheelchair, in her 80s, real leverage over him for the first time in decades and forced him to be nice to her. He said that if Marchand had lived, the two of them would have gone on, and that Livia would have had the last word. So the character built entirely out of never being pinned down, who never in 6 seasons said a sentence you could take to anybody, was going to end by being made to speak. On a record, under oath. In a room with a stenographer. Instead, she ends as a face assembled out of offcuts, saying lines she'd already said, in an argument about a book she never wrote in. I don't want to make that sound like anybody planned it, because nobody did. A woman died and a television program had to do something. But it's the most on-theme ending that character could possibly have got, and they got it by accident, and I've never been able to decide whether that's funny. She's dead at the start of the 3rd season, and there are 4 more seasons after that, and I'd argue she's in most of them. Gloria Trillo turns up about 6 episodes later. Mercedes Saleswoman, another one of Melfi's patients, and Tony falls into it hard and fast in a way he hasn't with anyone else. And for a while the show lets you think this is the good one, because she's funny and she's smart, and she gets him in a way Carmela stopped bothering to years ago. Then it turns. She wants more than he'll give, and she starts doing things about it, and there's a fight in her house that goes somewhere neither of them expected. And in the middle of it, she says, "Poor you." It's 2 words, and it's a coincidence in universe, because Gloria has never met Livia and never will. But Tony hears it, and something in him closes, and he has her on the floor with his hands round her throat, and he is very close to finishing it. That's the second time. The first was Melfi, against the wall, when she said the accurate thing about his mother, and I don't think the show is telling you Gloria is Livia. She isn't. She's a much sadder and much less durable person, and the parallel isn't the point. It's that Gloria reaches the same place in him Livia did, and she reaches it in 2 words, 4 years after the woman who owned them stopped breathing. Janice keeps the rest of it, and there's an evening late in the 6th season that lays the whole inheritance out on a table with a Monopoly board on it. The 4 of them are at the lake house for Tony's birthday, and they've been drinking since about 2 in the afternoon. Earlier in the day, Janice has been telling Carmela what she got out of therapy, and the thing she came away with, her word, and it's the right one, is that their mother was a splitter, somebody who set her children against each other. She's got it exactly right. She's using the same term Melfi reached for 8 years earlier, and she is completely, cheerfully unaware that she is about to demonstrate it. Because by the evening Tony's needling her, the way he does, and she decides to swap family stories, and the one she reaches for is their father coming home from the Copa and putting a bullet through their mother's beehive. Carmela laughs so hard she can't speak. Tony is furious. Not because it's a horrifying thing to have happened to his mother, but because it makes them look like a dysfunctional family, which is a sentence a man says approximately 4 seconds before proving it. He goes after Janice's looks and her past. Bobby tells him the Sopranos go too far. Tony sings something obscene about his sister, and Bobby punches him in the face. By the end of it, the boss of North Jersey is on the floor of his brother-in-law's lake house with his mouth full of blood. Nobody in that room has any idea what just happened to them. Janice is right about the splitting and does it anyway in the same day, having named it out loud. Then there's the line, which does the longest traveling of anything Livia ever said. In the second season finale, feverish and poisoned and dreaming, Tony says it himself. It's all a big nothing, and it comes out of him like something he's remembered rather than something he's thought. And then AJ, 6 seasons in, 20-something, sunk into the depression that is the actual family inheritance, goes back to it. He can still quote his grandmother. He was 13 when she said it to him, and it's the thing he kept. And when Tony is shot and spends most of half a season somewhere else entirely, the hotel, the wrong briefcase, the house on the hill with the light in the doorway and the voices telling him to come in, there's a figure standing in that doorway. It's not clear, it's not meant to be, but it looks like her, and Tony's unconscious knows what's waiting in the house, and he does not go in. That belongs to a different video, and I'll leave it alone. Meadow's the one I'm least sure about, and I'll flag it as a reading, rather than pretend otherwise. But there's an argument that she gets a version of it too, that the way she manages Tony, particularly about what he is and how she's decided to feel about it, and the way she handles AJ runs on the same mechanism at a higher altitude. Grievance stated as fact. The position of the person who has understood more and been given less. It's better dressed than Livia's. It comes with a Columbia education and a vocabulary about systems and prejudice, and it's doing something structurally similar. If that's right, then the interesting part is that the method survived the move. It came out of a house in the Ironbound with no money in it, and it's still working in North Caldwell, in a family with a pool, in the mouth of a young woman about to go to law school. And Tony, obviously. Tony most of all. He spends 6 seasons and a great deal of money in a room with a professional, building himself a vocabulary, the gene, the predisposition, the depression, the father he had, the mother he had, and every word of it does the same job her silence did. It explains why he is as he is, it locates the cause somewhere he can't be expected to reach, and it leaves him free to go on exactly as before. His mother managed all that without ever finding a word for any of it. He needed a specialist. Early on, in one of the first sessions, Melfi gets somewhere near the subject, and Tony heads her off. All that stuff about Freud, and every boy wanting to sleep with his mother, that's not going to fly in here. And he's right, actually. It doesn't apply, and it isn't what's wrong with him. What's wrong with him is much simpler and has no theory attached to it, which is that the person who raised him was not on his side, and he has known that since he was small and has never once been able to say it in a room. The argument I've been making across all of these videos is that the people on this show see themselves clearly, and that the clarity doesn't move them, that understanding on The Sopranos is not the beginning of change, but a substitute for it, a thing you can hold up and turn over and go on exactly as you were. Tony gets 7 years of that. He learns the words. He learns that his mother was borderline or narcissistic or whatever the term is that week, that he's got a gene for the depression, that the panic attacks come from an afternoon in 1967, and none of it costs him a single decision. It's the most articulate Stasis on television. Livia is where that comes from, and she's also the version of it with nothing added. She never went to a psychiatrist, and never wanted to, and thought the whole enterprise was a racket, and she had no vocabulary for herself at all, and she didn't need one, because she'd worked out something more efficient than self-understanding. She'd worked out that if you never say what you want, nobody can hold you to it. Not your son, not your brother-in-law, not the federal government with a microphone in your room, and, this is the part that makes her more than a monster, not yourself either, lying in bed at the end of a day on which a young man got shot through the eye. She told the truth constantly. She told Junior a true thing about a psychiatrist. She told Artie a true thing about his restaurant. She told AJ a true thing about dying alone. And every one of them went off, and she was never in the room when it did, and she was never lying. That's the whole apparatus, and the reason it can be inherited is that it doesn't require any particular intelligence or malice to operate. Janice runs it badly. Tony runs it with a diagnosis attached. Meadow, maybe, runs it in the language of the professional class she's about to enter. What none of them can do is put it down, because it isn't a strategy any of them chose. It's the water in that house. Tony spends 6 seasons, and I don't know how many thousands of dollars, building a way to say out loud what his mother accomplished in total silence, and at the end of it, he's the same man. She'd have found that funny, I think, in the flat way she found things funny, the money, mainly, the idea of paying somebody. He goes to a professional twice a week for the better part of a decade to arrive at a version of the thing she did for free, in a kitchen, in about 4 seconds, while complaining about the ham.